Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we'll be exploring a topic I know a lot of you are interested in, especially with all the news lately, the world of autonomous vehicles.
Self-driving cars, robot taxis, the whole shebang.
Yeah, exactly. Are we really on the verge of a transportation revolution?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
And to help us get to the bottom of this, we've got some pretty interesting source material to dig into. First, we have some personal notes from a self-proclaimed tech enthusiast who's been following this topic closely.
Sounds promising. Always good to get an insider perspective.
Absolutely. And we also have this great article from the Tech Showcase website. Seems like they did a pretty deep dive themselves.
Nice. So you've got a good mix of personal insights and professional analysis to work with.
Exactly. Our mission today is to figure out just how close we are to that future everyone's talking about, where cars drive themselves.
Yeah, the Jetsons promised us flying cars, but maybe self-driving ones are a more realistic first step.
Maybe so, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand where we're going, we need to start with where we are.
Good point. Got to lay the groundwork first.
Right. Both sources talk about these 6 levels of vehicle autonomy. They're defined by the Society of Automotive Engineers, the SAE.
Ah, yeah, the SAE levels. That's a good framework. It basically tells you how much a vehicle can actually do on its own without any human intervention.
So, like, level 0 is a regular car with no automation, right?
Yep, your good old-fashioned stick shift.
Hmm.
Then you climb the ladder to level 1, which is where you start seeing features like adaptive cruise control.
Okay, so the car can kind of help out a bit, but you're still in control.
Precisely. And then we move up to level 2, which is where things get more interesting. This is where you see things like lane keeping assist and self-parking features.
So the car is taking on more responsibility, but you still got to be alert and ready to take over at any moment.
Right. Think of it like having a co-pilot who's still learning the ropes.
Mm.
You can't just zone out completely.
And then we hit level 3, which is where things start to feel really futuristic.
This is where the line gets a bit blurry. The car can handle a lot more, even driving itself in certain situations, like on a highway. But you still need to be ready to intervene if things get hairy.
So it's like the car is in the driver's seat, but you're still the designated driver, ultimately responsible.
Exactly. It's a partnership, but one that requires a lot of trust and vigilance on the human side.
And then we have levels 4 and 5, which are the holy grail of autonomous driving.
Oh, yeah. Level 4 is what we call high automation, where the car can pretty much handle everything in most situations, but there might still be some limitations.
Like maybe it can't handle snowstorms or super dense urban environments.
Something like that. And then finally, we reach level 5, which is full autonomy. This is where the car can handle anything, anywhere, anytime, without any human intervention whatsoever.
So that's the dream, right? Cars that can drive themselves in literally any condition.
It is. It's the ultimate goal for many in the industry, but we're not quite there yet.
So where do most cars on the road today fall on this scale?
Well, most of the cars we're driving are somewhere between levels 2 and 3, according to both of our sources.
So we're still in that assisted driving phase rather than true autonomy.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah,
But the technology is evolving rapidly. It's really exciting to see how quickly things are progressing.
it is. But all this talk of self-driving cars, I mean, does everybody even want that? I was looking at some research you shared, and apparently around 60% of people are kind of hesitant about riding in fully self-driving cars.
Yeah, I can see why. It's a big leap of faith, right? To hand over control of your safety to a machine.
It's a big change for sure. I guess that's why governments are stepping in, trying to set some ground rules and ensure everything is rolled out safely and smoothly.
Right, it's a totally new frontier, so you got to have some rules of the road, so to speak.
For example, the U.S. has something called the Self-Drive Act.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
That's a big one. It's basically designed to encourage the development and testing of self-driving cars while also making sure it all happens responsibly.
So more testing, more data, and hopefully safer systems in the long run.
That's the idea. And it also helps build trust, both for the public and for the industry itself.
Makes sense. Shows that things are being taken seriously and considered carefully. But let's jump ahead for a second. Both sources suggest that we could be seeing fully autonomous vehicles on our streets by 2035.
Yeah, 2035 seems to be the magic year that a lot of folks are predicting.
That's not that far off. It's less than 10 years away.
It's wild to think about. Like, imagine a world where you could just hail a robo-taxi and it takes you wherever you need to go, no human driver needed.
Or think about all the changes to cities. Like parking lots could become obsolete. They could be turned into parks or housing or who knows what.
Right. One of the sources even predicts that in a city like Manhattan, They could reduce parking needs by almost 90% if everyone switched to shared self-driving cars.
Wow, that's insane. But for now, let's get back to the present and talk about the companies who are actually leading this charge in the US. One name that keeps popping up in our sources is Waymo.
Waymo, yeah. They're definitely one of the front runners for sure.
They've got a ton of self-driving cars already out there, testing in places like California and Phoenix.
Right. And they've also launched their robotaxi service in a few cities, and it seems to be doing really well.
Yeah, I saw in the notes that their ridership doubled in just a few months. They went from 50,000 riders per week to 100,000.
That's huge. It shows that people are willing to embrace this technology, at least in certain contexts.
It's a good sign for sure. But it's not just Waymo, right? There's GM's Cruise Automation, which is expanding into new cities all the time.
Yep, they're making big moves, especially after some setbacks they had a while back.
And then there's Tesla, of course. They're always pushing the boundaries with their driver assistance systems. It almost feels like a race to see who can perfect it first.
There's definitely some healthy competition out there, which is good for innovation. But even with all these big players making strides, fully autonomous vehicles are still in their early stages, especially in the US.
Yeah, the article predicts that by 2034, self-driving cars will still make up less than 1.5% of total car sales in the US. So it's going to be a while before they take over the roads completely.
Definitely. It's a gradual process, but even if they're not everywhere yet, it's fascinating to look at what's actually powering these vehicles.
Yeah. What's the secret sauce? How do they work?
It's not magic, though it might seem like it sometimes. It's really all about some incredible technology that's been developing for years. At the core of it all is artificial intelligence, or AI for short. It's kind of like the brains of the operation.
Right, AI. We hear about it everywhere these days. But what's so special about the AI in self-driving cars? What makes it different?
It's the way it interacts with the real world in real time. It's constantly processing tons of information, making decisions, and adjusting to changing conditions.
So it's not just following a pre-programmed set of instructions. It's actually learning and adapting as it goes.
Exactly. It's like imagine you're driving and you see a ball roll into the street.
Yeah.
Your brain instantly starts processing a bunch of information.
Like, is there a kid chasing after it? Should I slow down? Is there a car coming from the other direction?
Exactly. And that's kind of what the AI in a self-driving car is doing, but on a much more complex level. It's taking in data from all these different sensors, cameras, radar, LiDAR, you name it. And it's using that data to make split-second decisions about steering, braking, accelerating, all the things a human driver would do.
That makes sense. So it's like the car is constantly building a picture of the world around it and then figuring out how to navigate through it safely.
Yep, that's a good way to put it. And it's not just reacting to what it sees, it's also predicting what might happen next, based on patterns and probabilities.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. But I gotta ask, how does it actually learn? Like, does somebody have to program all those scenarios into the system?
That's where machine learning comes in. It's kind of like, imagine teaching a kid to ride a bike.
Yeah.
You don't tell them every single thing they need to do, right?
Yeah.
You give them some basic instructions and then let them practice and learn from their mistakes.
Ah, so it's like trial and error, but for a computer.
Exactly. They feed the AI massive amounts of data, like videos of real-world driving scenarios. And the AI uses that data to identify patterns, learn the rules of the road, and even figure out how to handle unexpected situations.
So it's constantly improving and getting better as it experiences more of the real world.
Precisely. And that's one of the reasons why all this testing is so important. The more these cars drive, the smarter they become.
That makes a lot of sense. But how does all this data crunching actually happen in the car? It sounds like it would need a pretty powerful computer.
Oh, it does. And that's where companies like NVIDIA come in. They make these super powerful processors specifically designed for self-driving cars. Like one of the sources mentions the NVIDIA Drive AGX platform, which can handle trillions of operations per second.
Trillions. That's mind-blowing. So it's basically like having a supercomputer on wheels crunching all that data in real time.
Exactly. And it's only getting more powerful as technology advances.
So it's not just about the AI itself, but also about the hardware that enables it to run smoothly. But how do these cars actually, see the world around them? How do they know where they are and what's going on?
That's where the sensors come in. They're kind of like the eyes and ears of the car.
Okay, so we're talking about things like cameras, radar, and LiDAR.
Right, you got it. Each sensor type has its own strengths and weaknesses. Cameras are great at picking up visual details, like lane markings, traffic signs, and pedestrians.
So they're good at recognizing things, kind of like our own eyes.
Right. And radar uses radio waves to detect objects and measure their distance and speed, even in bad weather conditions.
So that's helpful for things like adaptive cruise control and emergency braking, right?
Exactly. And then there's LiDAR, which uses lasers to create a super detailed 3D map of the surroundings. You can see through fog and darkness and detect even tiny objects.
So it's kind of like a super-powered vision system that can see things even we can't.
Pretty much. And the cool thing is, all these sensors work together to create a complete picture of the environment.
Hmm.
Like, imagine you're walking down the street and you see a car coming.
Right. I see it with my eyes, hear it with my ears, and maybe even feel the vibrations on the ground. It all adds up to a complete experience.
Exactly. And it's the same for a self-driving car. All the data from the sensors is combined and processed by the AI to create a comprehensive understanding of what's happening around it.
Wow. It's like giving the car a sixth sense, a way to perceive the world in a way that we can't even imagine. But how do these cars talk to each other? Like if they're both approaching an intersection, how do they decide who goes first?
That's where things like vehicle-to-vehicle communication, or V2V, come in. It allows cars to share information about their speed, location, and intentions, kind of like having a conversation with each other.
Ah, so they can coordinate their movements and avoid collisions, even if they're not in direct line of sight.
Precisely. And it's not just car to car. There's also vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, or V2I. This is where cars can talk to things like traffic lights and road signs.
So, like, the car could know that a light is about to turn red even before it's visible to the human driver.
Yep, exactly. And it could even get information about traffic congestion or accidents up ahead and adjust its route accordingly.
That's amazing. It's like creating a whole interconnected network of vehicles and infrastructure all working together to make transportation smoother and safer.
That's the vision, yeah. And to make it all work seamlessly, you need fast, reliable communication. That's where 5G connectivity comes in. It provides the bandwidth and speed needed to handle all that data transfer in real time.
So 5G is kind of like the backbone of this whole self-driving ecosystem.
You could say that, yeah. It's what enables all the cool stuff like real-time mapping, traffic updates, and even over-the-air software updates for the vehicles themselves.
It's like giving these cars a constant connection to the cloud, so they're always learning and improving. But even with all this amazing technology, there's still this big question of public trust.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, you're
Yeah.
basically asking people to put their lives in the hands of a machine, right?
It's a big leap of faith, for sure. And there have been some high-profile accidents involving self-driving cars, which definitely doesn't help.
Right. Even if those accidents are statistically rare, they get a lot of attention, and that can make people hesitant.
The article mentions that only 14% of Americans currently feel safe in a self-driving car. That's a pretty low number.
Yeah, it shows that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of building trust and demonstrating the safety of this technology.
But wouldn't removing human error from the equation actually make our roads safer in the long run? I mean, the notes point out that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the NHTSA, attributes a whopping 94% of accidents to human error.
That's a really compelling point, and theoretically it makes sense. If we can take the human element out of the equation, at least the fallible part of it, then yeah, we should see a significant reduction in accidents.
Right, like machines don't get distracted, they don't get tired, they don't drive under the influence, they just follow the rules and make rational decisions.
Exactly. But there's still this gap between the potential and the reality. We need to see more real-world data, more evidence that these systems are actually safer than human drivers in a variety of situations.
So it's like we need to prove that the technology is reliable and trustworthy before we can expect people to embrace it fully.
Exactly. And that takes time, testing, and transparency. The companies developing this technology need to be open about how their systems work, how they handle different scenarios, and how they address safety concerns.
So no more black boxes.
You're right.
People want to understand what's going on under the hood.
Yep. Transparency is key to building trust. And it's not just about the technology itself. We also need to have open and honest conversations about the potential impact of this technology on society as a whole.
Like, what about jobs? A lot of people are worried that self-driving cars will put truck drivers and taxi drivers out of work.
That's a valid concern, and it's something we need to address. It's not just about replacing jobs, it's about creating new ones and retraining people for the jobs of the future.
Right. Like we'll need people to design, build, maintain, and regulate these self-driving systems. It's a whole new industry that's emerging.
Exactly. And we need to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate in this transition, that no one is left behind.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the social and economic implications as well.
Precisely. It's a complex issue with lots of moving parts,
Hmm.
but one thing's for sure, self-driving cars are going to have a major impact on our lives, one way or another.
Absolutely. But speaking of impact, let's talk about regulations for a bit. I mean, who's actually in charge of making sure all this happens safely and responsibly?
That's a great question, and it's one of the biggest challenges facing the industry right now. You see, in the U.S., there's no single federal law that specifically addresses self-driving cars. It's kind of a patchwork of regulations, with each state having its own rules.
So it's like you cross a state line and suddenly the rules of the road change for your self-driving car.
Pretty much, yeah. And it can get really complicated, especially for companies trying to test and deploy their vehicles across multiple states.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It can be, yeah. And it also slows down innovation because companies have to navigate all these different regulatory hurdles. What we really need is a unified national framework that provides clarity and consistency.
So like a set of federal guidelines that everyone can follow no matter where they're testing or operating their vehicles.
Exactly. That would make things a lot easier for everyone involved and would also help to ensure a level playing field for all the companies developing this technology.
It makes sense. But it's not just about the legal framework, right? We also need to think about the infrastructure that will support these vehicles.
Absolutely. Our roads, traffic lights, and even parking systems were designed for human drivers, not self-driving cars. We'll need to make some changes to accommodate this new technology.
So like smart traffic lights that can communicate with cars, dedicated lanes for autonomous vehicles, maybe even charging stations for electric self-driving cars.
Exactly. It's a whole new world of possibilities, but it also requires a significant investment in infrastructure upgrades.
So it's like we need to build a whole new transportation ecosystem to support this transition to self-driving cars.
In a way, yeah, it's a gradual process, but it's happening. And as more self-driving cars hit the road, we'll start to see more of these infrastructure changes being implemented.
It's exciting to think about the potential. Like imagine a city where traffic flows smoothly, accidents are rare, and parking is a breeze.
That's the dream, right? But it's important to remember that this transition won't happen overnight. It's going to be a long road, and there will be bumps along the way.
For sure. But even if we don't see fully autonomous cars everywhere tomorrow, it's clear that this technology is going to have a profound impact on our lives.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the technology itself. It's about how we use it to create a better future.
Well said. And speaking of the future, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the potential benefits of self-driving cars, beyond just the convenience factor.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about transforming the way we live, work, and interact with our environment.
So we've talked about the potential upsides, the hurdles to overcome, even who's building these things. But let's get down to brass tacks. How would these self-driving systems actually work in the messy real world, not just some test track?
You're hitting on a key point. Both the tech notes and that article highlight this, making sure these things are safe, especially when you've got pedestrians, cyclists, other cars, all in the mix.
Yeah, it's one thing to imagine a self-driving car cruising down an empty highway. But city streets are a whole different ballgame, right? People doing unpredictable things, that's going to be tough to program for.
You're telling me, imagine a pedestrian jaywalking or a cyclist weaving through traffic. Those are the kinds of things that even the best AI struggles with, that almost intuitive understanding of how humans behave.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about understanding the unspoken rules, the things people do that aren't in any manual.
Precisely. You need to interpret those little cues, hand gestures, even try to guess what someone's going to do before they do it. Almost like teaching a car to read minds.
That sounds ridiculously hard.
It is. And it goes beyond just reacting to what's right there. These systems need to be thinking ahead, what's down the road, traffic patterns, whether is there construction, an accident waiting to happen, all that.
So like multiple steps ahead, always analyzing, adapting. No wonder it's taking so long to get this right.
Yep, tall order. But if we can pull it off, self-driving systems that handle the real deal safely, it changes everything about how we move around.
Speaking of changing things, let's not forget how this shakes up the car industry itself.
Yeah.
Both our sources hint at some big disruptions coming.
Oh, yeah, it could be huge.
Yeah.
We might see a move away from everyone owning their own car towards more of a service, mobility as a service.
So instead of buying a car, you subscribe to some transportation service and they send a self-driving car whenever you need one.
That's the idea, like having your own personal chauffeur 24/7.
That's wild. But what happens to all the car companies, the dealerships, if that's the future?
Adapt or die. Right. You might see traditional companies teaming up with tech companies to build the self-driving brains or even become service providers themselves. The whole landscape shifts.
So not the end of cars, but a different road ahead for the companies making them.
You got it. Big changes, lots of unknowns, but also tons of opportunity. Like any big tech shift, some will win, some will get left behind.
It's mind-blowing to think about how this changes the economy, society, even our culture. Makes you wonder.
It does, doesn't it? And it's easy to get lost in the tech, but we got to remember it's about people, how their lives are affected by this, their jobs, their communities.
Right, the human side of it all, not just the machines.
Exactly. Tech should be a tool to help us, not the other way around.
Couldn't agree more. Well, folks, that about wraps up our deep dive into this wild world of autonomous vehicles.
It's been a ride. We've covered the tech, the good, the bad, the ethical stuff, all the things that come with something this groundbreaking.
Before we go, one last thought for our listeners. Now that you've heard all this, what do you think self-driving cars mean for you, for where you live?
Something to chew on for sure. Will it be good, bad, or a bit of both? We'll find out together. But going forward, the important thing is we do this thoughtfully, responsibly, making sure it benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to explore another fascinating topic, all thanks to the knowledge you share with us.